Hi, welcome to Lies and Secrets channel. We hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow through our apartment window, I felt the familiar comforting weight of Theodore's arm around me, but beneath the surface of our cozy life, a storm was brewing. Buck, our seemingly innocent addition, had brought with him not just companionship but chaos, secrets, and now an inexplicable incident that threatened to unravel the very fabric of our relationship. As Theodore returned home, unaware of the turmoil within me, I realized that tonight the truth would have to come out. Would he understand, or would this be the beginning of the end for us? The year was 1970, and our small, cozy apartment in the heart of the city was about to become the stage for a series of events that would forever alter the fabric of our lives. My husband Theodore and I had just moved in, eager to start our life together in a place that felt like our own little world. The walls were painted a soft, welcoming beige, and the furniture was a mix of inherited pieces and thrift store finds, each with its own story to tell. One evening, as the golden hues of sunset filtered through our window, Theodore came home with a surprise. "I've got something for us," he said, his eyes twinkling with excitement from behind his back. He produced a leash, at the end of which was Buck, a large, somewhat unkempt, beautiful dog with a coat that suggested he'd seen better days. "We've always talked about getting a pet, and look at him. He needs a home," Theodore explained, his voice filled with a mix of hope and affection. I couldn't help but smile at the earnestness in his eyes, though a part of me was skeptical about this sudden addition to our family. Buck, with his unruly fur and a gaze that seemed to hold secrets, was not your typical puppy. He was an adult, beautiful dog already set in his ways, and from the moment he stepped into our apartment, it was clear he was going to be a challenge. Training him was like trying to teach a fish to climb a tree. He refused to sit, stay, or even acknowledge basic commands. Instead, he seemed to have a mind of his own, often leading us on wild chases around our small space. As weeks turned into months, Buck's disobedience became a point of contention between Theodore and me. "He'll come around," Theodore would say, ever the optimist. While I grew increasingly frustrated with the chaos Buck brought into our once peaceful home. One particular evening, after a long day at work, I decided to tackle the mess under our dining table, a place where Buck had taken to hiding his toys and occasionally his less savory finds. I crawled underneath, pulling out tennis balls, chewed-up shoes, and other debris. It was then in that cramped, awkward space that the unexpected happened. Buck, perhaps sensing my frustration or simply playing his usual game, bounded over. I heard his paws thud against the wooden floor, and before I could react, he was upon me. His weight pinned me down, and in a moment of sheer panic and confusion, something occurred that was beyond my control, something so bizarre and unsettling that it left me speechless. I lay there under the table, my heart pounding, my mind racing with the implications of what had just transpired. How could I explain this to Theodore? The very thought of confessing such an incident was mortifying. As I extricated myself from under the table, my clothes disheveled, my dignity in tatters. I knew one thing for certain: this was a secret I could never share. But as I stood up, smoothing down my skirt, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much larger unraveling. The doorbell rang, slicing through the heavy silence of the apartment. Theodore was home early, and with him he brought an air of normalcy that was now a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing inside me. "Everything?" he asked, his voice laced with concern as he noticed my flustered state. I forced a smile, the weight of my secret pressing down on me. "Yes, just had a little trouble with Buck," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper, as Theodore moved to greet Buck, who was now innocently wagging his tail. I wondered how long I could keep this charade up. Truth was, I was caught in a web of my own making, and the more I tried to untangle myself, the tighter it seemed to bind. And somewhere deep down I knew that this was only the beginning. As Theodore settled into his favorite armchair, his eyes occasionally darting towards me with a mix of curiosity and concern, I busied myself in the kitchen, the clatter of dishes providing a flimsy shield against the storm of thoughts. In my mind, the incident with Buck had left me shaken, not just by the physicality of it, but by the realization of how quickly life could veer into the absurd. Dinner was a quiet affair. Theodore talked about his day at the office, his voice a soothing balm to my frayed nerves. I nodded along. My response is automatic, my mind still trapped under that table. You seem off tonight. Theodore observed his fork pausing midair. Is it really just but causing trouble? I swallowed hard, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. It's nothing really, just a long day, I said, avoiding his gaze. The evening stretched on with the mundane rhythm of our life together. Theodore suggested we watch a movie, something light to lift the mood. I agreed, grateful for the distraction as we sat on the couch, the screen flickering with images. I felt Buck's head rest on my lap, his eyes looking up at me with what I could only interpret as a mix of guilt and affection. I stroked his fur, trying to reconcile the affection I felt for him with the bizarre incident that had occurred. The movie ended and Theodore, sensing my need for solitude, retired to bed early. Alone in the living room, I stared at the blank television screen, the silence of the apartment pressing in on me. Buck had curled up at my feet, his breathing steady and deep. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a one-time mishap. Buck's behavior had always been unpredictable, but now it seemed to carry a weight, a significance I hadn't noticed before. Was this just the beginning of a pattern? The thought was unsettling. The next morning, the routine continued. Theodore left for work with a K*******s on my cheek, his usual cheerfulness, a stark contrast to the turmoil within me. I spent the morning cleaning, trying to erase any trace of the previous night's chaos. Buck followed me around, his tail wagging, seemingly oblivious to the storm he'd caused. Later that day, I decided to take Buck for a walk in the park, hoping the fresh air might clear my head. As we walked, I noticed how other beautiful dog owners looked at us, their expressions a mix of curiosity and judgment. Did they know? Could they tell my paranoia was getting the better of me? The park. Buck was his usual self, chasing squirrels, sniffing at every tree, and occasionally pulling me along with an enthusiasm that was hard to resist. It was during one of these playful tugs that I bumped into an old friend. Laura, hey, haven't seen you in ages. Laura exclaimed, her smile wide and genuine. And who's this handsome fellow? Buck, I replied, trying to muster enthusiasm. He's a handful. Laura laughed, bending down to pet him. They always are at first, but look at him. He's got spirit, you'll get the hang of it. Her words, meant to be comforting, only deepened my anxiety. If only she knew the full extent of what handling Buck entailed. As we chatted, Laura mentioned a beautiful dog training class she was attending. You should come. She suggested it might help. With Buck's spirited nature, the idea was appealing. Perhaps professional help could prevent any future mishaps. I agreed to join her next week, feeling a sliver of hope amidst the guilt. Returning home, the apartment felt different, charged with an unspoken tension. I prepared dinner, the normalcy of the task, grounding me. Theodore returned his presence, filling the R***** with warmth. We ate, talked about our days, and for a moment I could pretend everything was as it should be. But as night fell and Theodore and I lay in bed, his arm draped over me. The weight of my secret felt heavier than ever. I turned to face him, his face peaceful in sleep, and whispered into the darkness, I'm sorry. Theodore. The words hung there unanswered as I lay awake, the quiet of the night, amplifying the sound of my own heartbeat. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight the unresolved tension between what was said and what was left unsaid was the cliff I teetered on, unsure of when I might fall. The morning light was harsh, unforgiving as it streamed through the curtains, casting long shadows across the bed. I watched Theodore as he dressed for work, his movements precise and familiar, a stark contrast to the turmoil within me. Each button he fastened on his shirt felt like another layer of guilt being added to my already burdened conscience. I'm thinking of taking Buck to that training class today, I said, trying to sound casual, my voice betraying none of the anxiety that had kept me awake most of the night. Theodore paused his tie halfway through the loop. That's a great idea. Maybe it'll help with his behavior, he replied, his tone hopeful, unaware of the depth of the problem as he left his K*******s lingering on my forehead. I felt the weight of my secret grow heavier. The apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage where every act was scrutinized. Buck, sensing my unease, patted over his tail, wagging tentatively. I looked down at him, his eyes full of an innocence that belied the chaos he'd unwittingly caused. The beautiful dog training class was held in a small grassy area near the park. Laura was already there, her beautiful dog, a well-behaved collie sitting obediently at her side. She waved me over her smile, bright, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. Here we are, she said cheerfully as I approached. This trainer is amazing. She's got away with beautiful dogs. I nodded, trying to focus on the present, on the task at hand. The trainer, a stern-looking woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, began the session. Buck, however, seemed to have other plans. He pulled the leash. His energy barely contained his eyes, darting around, looking for anything more interesting than the commands being barked at him. Focus, Buck. I whispered more to myself than to him as he dragged me towards a group of beautiful dogs playing fetch. My heart raced not just from the physical exertion, but from the fear that his wild behavior would somehow reveal the unspeakable incident. Trainer approached, her eyes sharp. He's got a lot of energy, doesn't he? She observed, her voice carrying a hint of challenge. Yes, he's spirited. I managed my throat tight. Let's try this, she said, taking the leash from me. Sometimes they need a firm hand. Watching her handle with such ease, I felt a mix of relief and resentment. Relief that someone else could manage him, resentment that I couldn't. As the session progressed, Buck did show signs of improvement, responding to her commands with a surprising obedience. Yet each time he glanced back at me, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a reminder of our shared secret. After the class, Laura and I walked back together, Buck now trotting beside me with a semblance of discipline. You did well today, Laura said, her voice warm. It's just a matter of consistency. I nodded, the words consistency and control, echoing in my mind. If only she knew how much control I had lost. Back at home, the apartment felt even more oppressive. I busied myself with chores, trying to outrun my thoughts. But as I cleaned, I found myself under the table again, the very spot where everything had changed. Buck, as if drawn by some unspoken bond, came to sit beside me, his head resting on my knee. The phone rang, slicing through the quiet. It was Theodore, his voice a lifeline in my sea of guilt. How did the training go? He asked, his tone light, expecting good news. It went well, I replied, my voice catching. Buck seems to be learning. That's wonderful, Theodore said, his relief palpable. I knew he'd come around. Call ended, but his words lingered, a stark reminder of the facade I was maintaining. As evening approached, the tension in the apartment grew palpable. Theodore returned home, his presence filling the space with an air of normalcy that felt like a lie. Dinner was a silent affair, the clink of cutlery against plates the only sound. Theodore, sensing the shift in atmosphere, reached across the table. His hand covering mine. Is everything all right? He asked, his eyes searching mine for the truth I couldn't give. I forced a smile, the lie heavy on my just tired from the training. It was a lot. He nodded, accepting my explanation. But his gaze lingered, a silent question hanging between us after dinner, as we settled into our evening routine. I found myself watching him, this man I loved, and feeling the chasm of my secret widen that night as Theodore slept, his breathing even and deep. I lay awake, the darkness amplifying my fears. What if Buck did it again? What if Theodore found out? The questions tormented me, each one a thread pulling tighter around my heart. The next day, I decided to take Buck for another walk, hoping the routine might bring some semblance of peace. But as we walked, Buck's behavior took a turn. He began to pull harder, his eyes wild, his body tense. I struggled to control him, my grip on the leash still ***sping. Then in a moment of chaos, Buck broke free, darting towards a group of people. My heart sank as I chased after him, my mind racing with the possibilities of what could happen. He ran straight to a woman, circling her with an eagerness that was almost frantic. She laughed, bending down to pet him. But then her expression changed. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine, a mix of amusement and something else, something knowing he's quite the character. She said, her voice carrying a hint of suspicion. I managed a weak smile, my hands trembling as I reattached the leash. He's full of surprises. I replied, the words tasting like ash. As we walked away, her gaze lingered on me, a silent accusation in her eyes. I felt exposed, as if the world could see through me to the secret I harbored. Back at the apartment, the tension was palpable. Theodore was home early, his face etched with concern. I saw you at the park. He began, his voice low. You looked troubled. My heart stopped. Had he seen? Did he know the ****M seemed to close in around me, the walls whispering my guilt? It's nothing. I whispered, my voice barely audible, just Buck being Buck. Theodore's eyes searched mine, looking for the truth. The connection we once had now strained by my deceit. As night fell, the unresolved tension between us was a palpable entity in the ****M. Theodore, perhaps sensing the depth of my distress, didn't press further. Instead, he pulled me close, his embrace a silent plea for the truth I couldn't give. And there in the darkness, with Theodore's arms around me, I whispered into the void, I'm so sorry. The words, a confession to the shadows, a prelude to the storm that was yet to come. The next morning, the sun rose with a deceptive warmth, its rays casting a golden glow over our apartment that belied the chill in my heart. Theodore had left early for work, his ****S on my forehead, a fleeting touch of normalcy. Before the day's deceit began, I watched him go, his figure disappearing down the street, leaving me alone with Buck and the weight of my secret. I decided to take Buck for a walk, hoping the routine might offer some semblance of peace. Park was quiet, the early morning mist still clinging to the grass, giving everything a soft, ethereal quality. Buck, however, was restless, his energy palpable, his leash taut in my grip. As we walked, my mind replayed the previous night's conversation with Theodore, his concern. His gentle probing for the truth had left me feeling more isolated than ever. I couldn't shake the feeling that our relationship was fraying at the edges, threads of trust unraveling with each lie. I told. Suddenly Buck lunged forward, his sudden movement, yanking me out of my thoughts. He was fixated on something or someone across the park. My heart sank as I recognized the woman from yesterday, the one whose gaze had seemed to pierce through my facade. She was walking her own beautiful dog, a small, well-mannered terrier, and as she noticed us, her eyes narrowed slightly. Morning, she called out, her voice carrying a note of curiosity. Morning, I replied, my voice tight, trying to keep Buck from pulling me towards her. He's quite the energetic one, isn't he? She observed, her tone light, but her eyes sharp. Yes, he's full of life. I managed, my smile strained. She nodded, watching Buck closely. You know, beautiful dogs often reflect the energy of their owners. They sense our stress, our secrets. Her words felt like a trap, each one tightening around my throat. I nodded, unsure how to respond, the silence stretching uncomfortably between us. Well, I hope you find some peace today, she said, her voice softening, perhaps sensing my discomfort. Beautiful dogs are good for that, if we let them. I watched her walk away, her beautiful dog trotting obediently by her side, leaving me with a sense of foreboding. Buck, now calmer, sat by my feet, his eyes on me, as if waiting for me to make sense of the turmoil within. The walk back to the apartment was tense, my steps heavy with the burden of my unspoken confession. Once inside, the familiar surroundings offered no comfort. Every corner seemed to hold a shadow of my guilt, every creak of the floorboards a whisper of my deceit. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where everything had changed, and stared at the phone. The urge to call Theodore to confess everything was overwhelming, yet the fear of his reaction of losing him kept me silent. The day passed in a blur of chores and avoidance. I cleaned. I cooked, I did everything but face the reality of my situation. Buck followed me, his presence a constant reminder of that night. As evening approached, the tension in the apartment seemed to thicken the air heavy with unspoken words. Theodore turned home, his face weary from the day, yet his eyes lit up when he saw me. "How is your day?" he asked, his voice carrying a hopeful note. "It was fine." I lied, the word tasting like poison, just the usual. He nodded, but I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Dinner was a silent affair, the clink of cutlery against plates, the only sound. Theodore reached across the table, his hand covering mine, a gesture of comfort that felt like an accusation. "Something's been off, hasn't it?" he finally said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You've been distant, and it's not just Buck." I swallowed hard, the truth clawing at my throat. "Theodore, the doorbell rang, cutting through the tension. Theodore stood, his expression a mix of relief and confusion. "I'll get it," he said, moving towards the door. I sat there frozen. As I heard the muffled voices at the door, my heart raced, my mind conjuring up scenarios of who could be there, what they might know. When Theodore returned, his face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. "It's the neighbor from downstairs. She says she heard something strange last night, something about Buck," he said, his voice trembling. The R***M spun around me. The neighbor, the woman from the park, the secrets all converged into a single terrifying moment. Theodore looked at me, his gaze searching, desperate for an explanation. "Theodore, there's something I need to tell you." I began, my voice fairly a whisper. The confession I had held back for so long now teetering on the edge of my and there, with the weight of my secret about to spill, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the storm to break. The R***M seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as Theodore's eyes bore into mine, waiting for the words that would change everything. My heart was a drum, pounding out the rhythm of my fear and guilt. "Theodore," I started, my voice trembling. Need to tell you something about Buck. Something happened that night when I was under the table." Theodore's face was a mask of confusion, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean? What could have happened?" I took a deep breath, the air thick with tension. "Buck. He jumped on me, and in the chaos he did something." My words faltered, the memory of that night flooding back, making my cheeks burn with shame. "Did something." Theodore's voice was a mix of concern and disbelief. "Why, you mean did something?" I couldn't look at him. My gaze fixed on the floor, Husha mounted me. "Theodore. It was an accident, a horrible, bizarre accident. I was stuck and Theodore's chair scraped back as he stood abruptly, his face now a storm of emotions. You're saying, Buck." His voice broke, unable to finish the sentence. "Yes." I whispered the word, barely escaping my L***. I couldn't tell you, I was so ashamed, so confused. I didn't know how to explain it without it sounding like I was unfaithful. The silence that followed was deafening. Theodore paced the R***M, his hands running through his hair, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. "And you kept this from me all this time? You've been carrying this secret?" I was scared, I admit, tears now streaming down my face, scared of your reaction, scared of what it would mean for us. Theodore stopped pacing, his back to me, his shoulders tense. "And now, what does it mean for us?" "I don't know," confessed, my voice breaking. "I've been so lost. Theodore. I didn't want to hurt you, but I've been carrying this alone and it's tearing me apart." He turned slowly, his eyes red-rimmed, his expression unreadable. "You should have told me, we could have faced this together. Instead, you let it fester, let it come between us." I know, I sobbed, the weight of my decision now crushing. "I'm so sorry. Theodore. I love you and I didn't want to lose you over something so absurd." Theodore walked over his steps heavy and knelt in front of me, taking my hands in his. This is beyond anything I could have imagined, but we need to talk about this, really talk, no more secrets." The doorbell rang again, a sharp, intrusive sound that seemed to echo the chaos in my mind. Theodore's grip on my hands tightened. "Stay here," he said. His voice firm but gentle, he returned moments later. His face now a mask of confusion mixed with something else, something like fear. "It's the neighbor again. She says she has something else to tell us." My heart sank further. What more could there be? Theodore led the neighbor Mrs. Thompson into the living room. She was an elderly woman, her eyes sharp with concern. I didn't want to intrude, but after last night I felt I had to come back. She began, her voice shaky. "I heard noises and I saw something through the window. I thought it was just the beautiful dog being playful. But now hearing this, I think you should know. What did you see?" Theodore's voice was tight, his hand gripping mine like a lifeline. "I saw Buck. He was with you," she said, her gaze shifting uncomfortably to me. It looked like he was trying to mate with you. The ********************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************** unmanageable. Theodore's face was a study in shock, his grip loosening as he processed her words. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson." Theodore managed his voice hollow. She nodded, her expression one of sympathy, and left us alone with the weight of her revelation. Theodore turned to me, his eyes searching mine for something, anything that could make sense of this. "Why didn't you push him away? Why didn't you scream for help?" I was in shock. "Theodore, it was so sudden, so unexpected. I was trapped under the table, and by the time I could react, it was over." I explained, my voice a whisper of despair. Theodore stood, his movements mechanical, as if he was trying to distance himself from the reality of our conversation. "I need some time to think," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. This changes everything." He walked to the door, paused, and then left without another word, the door closing with a finality that echoed through the empty apartment. I sat there alone, the silence now a deafening roar in my ears. Buck, sensing the shift in atmosphere, came to lie beside me, his head on my lap, his eyes full of an innocence that now felt like a cruel mockery. The night stretched on, each second a lifetime, each minute an eternity. I was alone with my thoughts, my guilt, and the beautiful dog that had unwittingly become the catalyst for the unraveling of my life. As dawn broke, casting a pale light into the r*****m, I knew that the resolution of this storm was still ahead, a cliffhanger that left me teetering on the edge of my own existence, unsure if Theodore would return, if our love could survive. This bizarre twist of fate. The morning after Theodore left the apartment was eerily silent, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded the night before. Buck, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, lay quietly by my side, his eyes occasionally lifting to meet mine with a look that seemed to ask for forgiveness or perhaps understanding. I sat there, the weight of my confession and Theodore's departure pressing down on me like a physical force. I couldn't stay in this limbo of guilt and uncertainty. With a deep breath, I decided to take action, not just for myself but for our relationship. I picked up the phone, my hand trembling. As I dialed Theodore's office, his secretary answered, her voice crisp and professional. "Hello, this is Theodore's wife. Could you please tell him? I need to speak with him urgently." I managed to say, my voice steadied despite the storm inside. "He's in a meeting right now, but I'll let him know as soon as he's free," she replied, her tone softening slightly. I hung up, feeling a mix of relief and dread. The wait was agonizing, each tick of the clock echoing the pounding of my heart. Finally, the phone rang, shattering the oppressive silence. "Theodore," I answered, my voice a mix of hope and fear. "Yes, it's me," he said, his voice distant, cautious. "I got your message. What is it?" "Two need to see you. We need to talk, not just about what happened, but about us, about everything." I pleaded, the urgency in my voice palpable. There was a pause, a heavy silence that stretched on. "All right," he finally said. "Meet me at the park by the old oak tree, 1 hour." The park, where this all began, seemed fitting for our confrontation. I dressed quickly, my movements mechanical, and left with Buck, who trotted beside me. His leash, now a symbol of the control I had lost and was desperately trying to regain the walk to the park, was a blur, my mind racing with what I would say, how I could possibly mend what had been broken. The old oak tree stood tall and imposing, its branches stretching out like arms, offering solace or perhaps judgment. Theodore was already there, his back to me, staring off into the distance. Theodore called softly. As I approached, he turned his face a mask of emotions. I couldn't fully read. "I've been thinking," he started, his voice low, "about what you said about what happened. It's a lot to process." "I know," I whispered, stepping closer. "I should have told you sooner. I was scared." "Theodore, scared of losing you, of you thinking I was unfaithful." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "It's not just about what happened. It's about the trust, the secrets. How can we move forward if there's the shadow between us?" "I want to move forward," I said earnestly. "I want to rebuild that trust. I love you, Theodore, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Theodore sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I need time to understand, to forgive," but he paused, looking at Buck. "I think we should also consider what's best for him. Maybe he needs more space, more training, or perhaps a different home." The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. "No, Theodore, please. Buck, despite everything, has been a part of our life. He's not just a beautiful dog. He's part of our family." Theodore's gaze softened slightly. "I know, but we need to think about our well-being too. Maybe professional help for him or us or both." The conversation shifted then from blame to solutions, from despair to a cautious hope. We talked about therapy, about beautiful dog trainers, about how we could navigate this bizarre twist in our lives together. The air around us seemed to lighten, not with resolution, but with the promise of working through it. As we walked back home, side by side, but with a noticeable gap between us, I felt the first stirrings of reconciliation. Theodore's hand brushed mine, a tentative touch that spoke volumes. "I'm not saying it's easy," Theodore murmured. "But I'm here, we'll figure this out together." The days that followed were a mix of therapy sessions, beautiful dog training classes, and long, heartfelt talks. We learned about canine behavior, about communication, about the fragility and resilience of human relations. **SS Buck, under the guidance of a professional trainer, began to show signs of improvement. His wild energy channeled into more constructive outlets. One evening, as we sat on our couch, Theodore's arm around me, Buck at our feet, I felt a semblance of peace. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" I asked, looking up at Theodore. He nodded, his eyes reflecting a newfound resolve. "Yes, we are. It's not just about moving past this, it's about growing from it, and there in the quiet of our living are **M, with the shadows of our past mistakes slowly receding." I realized that our story wasn't just about infidelity or betrayal. It was about understanding, forgiveness, and the complex, often messy journey of love. As the night deepened, Theodore's grip on my hand tightened, a silent vow that we would face whatever came next together. And as I looked at Buck, now peacefully asleep, I knew that our life, with all its unexpected turns, was ours to shape, to mend, and to cherish. The storm had passed, but the journey was far from over, and in that moment I was ready for whatever lay ahead. If you feel that this story is meaningful and brings useful lessons, please like and subscribe to the channel to support me.